Hello Year 11, and this is Mrs Bradley. Today's revision session is going to be on one of our Inspector Calls AO2 quotes, and that is, "I was in that state where a chap easily turns nasty." Now what I'd like you to do first is to jot the quote down in the middle of a blank page and annotate the quote with everything you can think of and remember. So you've been taught this before without looking at your books, without looking at your revision guides. What can you remember? So it might be worth you pausing the recording now and taking 5 minutes to think, okay, who says this? When do they say it? Who are they saying it to? What does the quote actually mean? And then I want you to grab a highlighter, highlight all the key words that you think are important. Google them. What type of word are they? So what's the word class? They're a noun or a verb, or is it a simile or a metaphor? What do they actually mean? What's the dictionary definition of those words? And what do they show about the character? So pause me now and take a good 5-10 minutes jotting down everything you can remember about that quote. Okay, we're back. Now I've jotted down some scaffolding questions that can help and support you and stretch your analysis before I talk through what you could have said. So I want you to pause again for another 5-10 minutes and think about these questions and answer them by annotating the quote. Now the red ones are going to be the easier questions, the orange ones are going to be slightly harder, and then the green ones are harder still. So there's a real range depending on your ability and what you can remember, and they will just help to just stretch you that little bit further. So who is Eric an allegory for? When does he say it? And in what way or ways does it show an abuse of his power? What does the determiner that mean and suggest? Why does he use a pronoun I, and what does that suggest about his attitude? He uses a euphemism, which is when you think of a more pleasant way of saying something that's quite hurtful or upsetting. Where is the euphemism? Can you identify it? And what might Priestley be saying about men of that class? And then I want you to think about the connotations of the noun chap. It's a strange word to use and one that's only used in certain contexts. What are those contexts? Is it appropriate here? And what does it suggest about Eric? So give yourself a good 5-10 minutes, pause the video and look at those questions and annotate anything else that you can remember. Okay, so now I'm going to go through the quote a word at a time. Now it might be that you have to pause me at the end of each slide just to make sure that you've got all of the analysis down. This is particularly good if you've missed a lesson and you don't remember doing this in the first place. It's particularly good if the activities that you've done previously you couldn't really remember anything, but I would recommend, even if you did remember a lot, to get all of the analysis down, absolutely everything, and then this can be sort of template that you come back to. You can give this sheet of paper to your nan and you can say, test me nan, I'm going to tell you everything about it, what have I forgotten? You can write this up in some Sleal paragraphs, the old Tuqui. So there's lots of things you can do with this analysis. Just make sure you get all of it down. You wouldn't want to miss anything. Okay, so Eric says this when explaining to the inspector his behaviour towards Eva. So the people in the room suspect it was Eric, apart from Mrs. Berlin, and Eric sort of walks in and says, okay, you know, don't you? It ultimately speaks to the excuse that he was angry, drunk and wanted his own way, and Eva had sort of rebuked him, she'd pushed him away, she declined him, and he didn't like it. He didn't like that she wasn't interested. And this comes before a sexual assault. Now, a sexual assault is a much sort of softer way, I guess, of saying than saying rape. It's never mentioned as rape in the play itself. If you said rape, you'd be absolutely fine with that, but sexual assault maybe sounds a little bit more formal. And basically, it's rooted in Eric's power. Now, Eric has power on two levels. One, as a member of the patriarchy, as a patriarchal power as a man. Men are, particularly during this time, more powerful than women. You would believe a man over a woman. physically powerful, more powerful in this instance, and also his status as a man of a higher class. So he's got two lots of power in which he abuses to sexually assault Eva, and this is where he explains why he does it. And it's this really, when you're writing your Sleal paragraph, you'd want to say your statement, you'd want to provide this quote, and then you'd want this slide to just explain in a very basic way what it is that Eric's saying here. And then you're going to go into your analysis. You're going to go into that deeper analysis. So you're going to say the idea of like drinking, like he talks about himself being in a state. That's because he drinks too much. Now, all the way through, from the very, very beginning, the Berlins are drinking a lot of alcohol because alcohol is symbolic of their class. They can afford it. They're drinking port and champagne. So there's a quality in what they're drinking. But there's also this sense that they don't have the responsibility of others, responsibility of getting up for work in the morning. And so there's this message here that those in charge might be drunk with power, have little restraint, and show little care over anybody around them. And what Eric is saying here in this quote, in its very basic form, is that the violence is inevitable and therefore it should be forgiven. You know, I did a bad thing, I was drunk, so it wasn't really my fault. So what he's trying to do is blame his actions on the drink and what we call diminished responsibility, when it's not totally your responsibility because you're incapacitated in some way. There's something holding you back, something to blame. If we look at that pronoun I, so, you know, the pronoun I, at least he's taking some responsibility. He's saying me alone. It's not a we, it's not an us, it's not an our, there's not a group of them. Eric is to blame for his actions and he recognises it. Then he uses the determiner that state. And I think the determiner that makes it seem like, you know, that state, it's sort of commonly understood, which sort of like lessens the blame. It normalises behaviour, you know, that state, that specific state. We all know it, we've all been through it. So his behaviour's normalised, it's a social norm. It upholds gender stereotypes, so men are sort of bestial, we get drunk, we use women at the end of the night. That's just what men do, you know, that state. It becomes one of many men, a societal problem. And if we look at the noun state itself, he is uncontrollably drunk. If you're in a state, you cannot control your actions. What he's doing is contextualising the position. So men plus drink equals violence. And it's that state that we're talking about. It's inevitable. He's saying that it's familiar to upper class men, you know, the state that they get in. It's a state we all get in. And therefore we all use violence and we all abuse our power. It's inevitable. And therefore you should excuse me. And it upholds the stereotype that men are strong and powerful, using anger in place of real emotions. Instead of him saying how he feels, he uses this euphemism of state, because if you notice, he doesn't say drunk, he doesn't say sort of comatose, he uses the word state. It's euphemistic, it makes it sound more pleasant than it actually was, but it also suggests it has little control over himself, it excuses himself. It seems to be something of a ritual that the upper classes drink, and potentially leads to one of the 7 deadly sins of gluttony, an inability to stop himself. If we were feeling particularly kind towards Eric, perhaps we could say that it is a coping mechanism. You know, he's sort of neglected by his parents, he's sort of belittled by his father, nobody thinks he's up to much, he's got to follow in his father's footsteps, he has little freedom in that way, so maybe he uses the drink to cope his sort of miserable life. But I guess there's a hypocrisy in that, there are lots of others worse off. Now we're going to talk about the determiner in the noun, a chap. Now, chap is a very informal word, isn't it? It makes it seem commonplace. It's a word for a young man. It sounds boyish. It sounds friendly. If you call somebody like, you know, that's behaviour of chaps, it makes it seem like you have low expectations of them. Sort of a boys will be boys. It's an excuse for negative male behaviour. It trivialises the situation. It's a colloquial term, and colloquial means everyday. Sort of everyday language, so it's really informal and colloquial, and it trivialises, it makes it seem like nothing. And then we're going to look at this adverbial phrase, easily turns nasty. It makes it clear that pleasantness and friendliness can change immediately if the chap doesn't get what he wants. I can be a chap 1 minute, not get what I want, and suddenly easily turn nasty, easily done, slip into it. And what it means is that his anger and his rage and his violence and his aggression become a tool that he uses to get what he wants. It also suggests that he has a short temper, can't control himself. This desire to control Eva through any means necessary was so great. The word nasty, again, it's euphemistic. It's a euphemism for rape. It sounds like something you would use on a playground. Children are nasty to each other. It's a childish word. It's a fairly harmless word, but he wasn't nasty, he sexually assaulted her, so again, it's euphemistic. It's as well perhaps a metaphor for capitalist greed, that they take what they want and they don't think about others. And he talks about a state when a chap easily turns nasty, but what he's neglecting to say here is it's a criminal offence. Now, this quote in itself reveals the consequence of Eric and those like him not getting what they want. So they show their dominance through intimidating those more inferior and lashing out to control others. Anger is often used as a way in which we control people or a situation, but in this instance, this need for dominance and control feels much more animalistic. And Eric will end up like Mr. Berlin's respectable friends in the future. He'll be old Joe Megate cornering a girl, refusing to accept no as an answer. And the other thing that's worth noting here is that Eric is an unreliable narrator. Look how many euphemisms he uses in this one quote. We can't rely on him for the truth. Now what I want you to do is I want you to turn back your sheet or get another sheet of paper that's plain. Turn over all the notes that we've just made and jot down absolutely everything that you can remember. Now turn back your revision notes and almost tick off and check off what you've remembered and what you've forgotten. And what I used to do is to just keep doing this, to keep repeating it until I remembered absolutely everything I wanted to say. You could also write these words on an AO2 cue card or a poster, and the repetition will help it go into your long-term memory. That's it for now. Thanks very much. Well done.